Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallor Grodner Attorneys, providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. lawmg.com. IU Alumni Association, connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement, extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.
Coming up on Indiana Newsdesk. One Indiana school is teaming up with one of the world's largest tech companies to put students on the cutting edge of agricultural technology.
Using GPS technology to identify hot spots in our fields and doing all of that stuff, the kids are getting interested in the fact that they can do that.
With 7 flu deaths already, Indiana health officials say the flu is more active earlier than in years past. And a program meant to help veterans find jobs is impacting a group already struggling to get work.
70% unemployment rate. It's very difficult for people who are blind or visually impaired to find work.
Those stories, plus the latest news headlines from across the state, right now on Indiana Newsdesk. Welcome to Indiana Newsdesk. I'm Joe Wren. The National FFA organization has been around for years and was founded well before computers and technology were intertwined with agriculture. But today, many farmers rely on technology and data in their fields. To reflect those changes in the industry, FFA has started a partnership with Microsoft, and an Indiana school is leading the charge in helping the company and organization define what the program will be for schools across the country. Brock Turner has the story.
Alicia Dickerson doesn't have a lot of time off between teaching and her work with the FFA. But when she does, say when school suddenly called off, she's still getting things done.
It was actually a snow day, and so I didn't have anything to do, so I wrote a grant on a snow day.
That snow day grant was for Farm Beats. Hauser High School is the only school in Indiana and one of just a few in the Midwest with the technology. The project's pitch is pretty simple. Microsoft provides the technology to measure soil conditions, while schools give their feedback and tell the company how to improve it. Dickerson, or Mrs. D as she's called by many of her students, has a number of other opportunities for her kids. She believes, though, this one is unique and offers an access to technology that other programs simply can't.
As we mechanize agriculture and get more efficient in the way that we are GPS planting our crops and using GPS technology to identify hot spots in our fields and doing all of that stuff, the kids are getting interested in the fact that they can do that, they can program, they can be involved in agriculture that way.
Like many small rural districts across Indiana, Hauser has a limited budget. Unlike other districts in rural parts of the state, though, Hauser's enrollment has increased over the last 5 years, according to data from the Indiana Department of Education. That enrollment increase affords administrators the opportunity to invest in new programs and facilities, like the one they're currently building.
Prepare and process the tilapia in the kitchen and then use them later. So same with all the vegetables that we grow in the greenhouse and everything that we do so they can see the whole process.
Hauser is one of a handful of districts in the state offering a computer science program, and that's something Dickerson credits in the development of her program.
It has really connected the dots for them. The computer science program that we have at Hauser and the ag program are two of the few extra electives that we offer to the kids, and so we've really tried to work together so that both of our programs can benefit, and I saw this as an opportunity for that as well.
While Dickerson still teaches students on more traditional topics like raising livestock, cooking, and welding, she says changes in the industry pushed her to adapt the program.
We're seeing a need in industry. We've talked to some of our local industries, Toyota, Cummins, even some of our local industries in Hope, that need kids that are able to do specific things. So whether that be program the robots that are running something on the line or weld or whatever it is, they can't find kids that are ready to go to work.
And that's just as true in Silicon Valley as it is in Hope.
It's very thin. There's not many students that are equipped with both sides, that is having a good background, good knowledge of agriculture, and people and students who are equipped with these skills. And this is where we realize that we need to bridge the gap.
Chandra says Farm Beats is a work in progress. The company hopes to learn from students and better understand their needs. Doing that, he says, will go a long way to achieving the program's long-term goals, like building a robust talent pipeline.
While we are building this product, it's important for us, so we are thinking of it globally. Part of it is what we are building at Microsoft, but we want to bring this technology to farmers right now as well as farmers of the future, which is where FFA is such an important partnership for us. We are working with the FFA on a curriculum around data and data-driven agriculture for 700 students.
While not all students in the program say it's altered their career paths, many say it has opened their eyes to how technology can be used in their classrooms. Hope FFA is using the program to test soil characteristics in their greenhouse, like water levels and temperature.
The coolest thing was learning actually how to do it, because whenever I first started, I had no clue even what Farm Beats was. So it was really cool to see, like, if I put this into the soil, it'll tell me this, and just seeing how all of this comes together.
And helping students make those connections is what keeps Dickerson coming back year after year.
To continue to connect the dots in agriculture. And agriculture is an industry that we always will need and we always have to have. And so we have to continue to modify what we are doing to meet the demands of our consumers. And so they need to understand that and be able to have educated conversations about it and go out and do things and change the world.
For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Brock Turner.
Now it's time for news headlines and the latest on this week's top stories. Indiana's high school graduating classes are getting bigger, but the rate of diploma recipients dipped slightly in 2019. According to the Department of Education, Indiana high schools graduated 87% of students last year. Non-public and traditional public school graduation rates landed at or above 90% for all students. Meanwhile, charter schools graduated students at a rate of about 40%. Increased school bus safety patrols helped police nab more than 400 Hoosiers running stop arms of school buses. Nearly 40 police agencies used grants to pay for extra patrols surrounding schools and bus routes. In total, the state says officers issued more than 2,500 tickets and over 1,400 warnings. Of those, nearly 500 of those tickets were for stop arm violations. The grants were part of a new state law passed after 3 children in Northwest Indiana were killed by a driver who ignored a bus stop arm. The Indiana State Board of Education approved a proposal that will cut state funding from some family and consumer science classes starting next school year. A new funding framework based in recommendations by the governor's workforce cabinet adds a series of more advanced courses in areas like manufacturing and information technology. But some classes that teach students skills focused on things like nutrition and personal finance didn't make the cut, prompting concerns from teachers, superintendents, and board members.
As we go forward, we really need to emphasize the whole child, the development of the whole student.
Officials from the workforce cabinet say the goal is to get schools offering more advanced courses aligned with possible student career paths and the state's shift toward more workforce development-oriented education policies like the new graduation pathways. Ultimately, the board approved the funding levels. By law, they have to, but schools can file an appeal with the Department of Workforce Development. The Indiana State Department of Health confirmed the 7th flu-related death of the season so far. 5 of the cases reported were people aged 65 and older, and a new report is expected today. As Mitch Legan explains, this season is off to a quick start.
Indiana is seeing a more active flu season than years past.
This is very early in the season, and what we've experienced this year, which is very unusual for flu seasons, is this much flu activity, heavy flu activity in December.
This year's flu season has hit older adults the hardest. According to Dr. Feldman, who also served as the state health commissioner from 1997 to 2001, that's because older people are particularly susceptible to the flu's B. Victoria virus, which is appearing earlier than normal this year.
And that's very unusual to be predominant, but also this early in the season. My experience is that we see the B viruses emerge later in the season.
Out of 3 flu strains, B. Victoria, H1N1, and H2N3, Feldman says the B virus is probably in the middle in terms of severity.
If it switches like it did last season from H1N1 to H3N2, then we're going to have more deaths and more widespread serious cases.
He says everyone can protect themselves from the flu by following some basic rules. Wash your hands, cough into your elbow, sanitize surfaces, and try to stay away from sick people. But the best way not to get sick? Get a flu shot.
Some people will also say when they come in, I got a flu shot once and the next day I got the flu. And let me tell you, it is impossible for a flu shot to cause the flu. It's not a whole virus. It's not alive. It cannot cause influenza.
Feldman says the flu season is far from over, and it's hard to predict what will happen next. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Mitch Legan.
There are now nearly 20 baby boxes in Indiana that allow people to anonymously leave newborns at firehouses. A baby box recently dedicated in northeastern Indiana became the state's 19th baby box. The boxes are containers with the door to the outside of a fire station building. When they're opened, an alarm sounds to alert staff that a child has been placed there. The boxes contain warming and cooling features. The boxes are legal because Indiana has a safe haven law. That law allows a person to anonymously surrender a healthy baby 30 days old or younger at an appropriate location without fear of criminal prosecution. Indiana had 9 surrenders at baby boxes during 2019. It's unlikely the General Assembly will give counties more money in the 2020 session for new voting machines. More than half the machines in Indiana don't have a paper backup, something election security experts insist is critical. Lawmakers do plan to use surplus money for some projects, like a swine barn at the state fairgrounds. But money for more voting machines doesn't make the list. Governor Eric Holcomb says that's because Secretary of State Connie Lawson has assured him Indiana's voting systems are secure. A community conflict resolution group released a report suggesting Bloomington assemble a task force to help oversee racial issues in the city. The Divided Community Projects Bridge Initiative began working on its report in August in response to ongoing issues at Bloomington's Farmers Market. The city shut down the market for 2 weeks this summer because it couldn't guarantee people's safety after one vendor's ties to a white supremacist group surfaced. The report suggested the task force be comprised of a diverse group of voices from around the community. Bloomington Mayor John Hamilton says he will push for a local income tax increase of 0.5% in 2020 to fund the city's efforts to combat climate change. Hamilton introduced the proposed tax hike after announcing a plan for Bloomington to create an environmental green ribbon panel by the spring. He says the tax would generate $8 million annually for new critical investments and could create a similar amount at the county level.
Let me be clear that I do not propose a revenue increase lightly. But I believe that the times in our future demand it, and that as a community, we are in a position to afford it.
If the tax hack is enacted, Bloomington's local income tax would increase from 1.25% to 1.75%. Hamilton's statements come after he, City Clerk Nicole Bolden, and Bloomington City Council members were sworn in. A Parks advocacy group says U.S. Steel's revised consent decree doesn't ensure protections for Indiana Dunes National Park. The agreement outlines how the company will make up for spilling 300 pounds of a cancer-causing chemical into a Lake Michigan waterway 2 years ago. The National Parks Conservation Association joins the City of Chicago and more than a dozen Indiana groups who oppose a motion to approve U.S. Steel's revised consent decree. They say U.S. Steel hasn't shown it will make the improvements needed to prevent spills or adequately inform the public when spills happen. Well, the sale of marijuana for recreational purposes is now legal in Illinois. The change took effect with the new year. Illinois is the 11th state to broadly allow marijuana's use and sale for people 21 or older. Neighboring Michigan made it legal starting December 1st. Indiana Senate Democrats say they'll push during this year's legislative session to decriminalize small amounts of marijuana possession while not legalizing the drug. One proposal would make possession of less than an ounce of marijuana an infraction rather than a misdemeanor. Well, Tennessee came back from a big deficit last night to beat Indiana Hoosiers football team in the Gator Bowl. The Volunteers scored twice in a 30-second span late in the game and then held on to stun Indiana 23-22. Indiana was up 22-9 before Tennessee rallied to shock most of the nearly 62,000 fans on hand. Injured quarterback Michael Penix and several other offensive starters return next season, which begins with Indiana's toughest road opener since the early 90s versus Wisconsin. Athletics programs around the state and country are facing a shortage of school sports and officials, and a class of students at IUPUI in Indianapolis is trying to tackle the problem. Professor David Pierce leads the class. He says this approach makes for better, stronger solutions and can be used in any area.
It's the ability of our students with young minds and innovative ways of thinking. They have just as much ability to bring the right solution to the table as someone with a really big title.
He says the program helps connect students with stakeholders in the field they hope to move into after graduation while proposing realistic solutions addressing ongoing widespread problems. The group plans to partner with Brookside Community Development and begin a sports officiating training program for youth in the area. Well, Bloomington Restaurant is doing what it can to foster kindness and compassion this holiday season. Anatolia opened its doors on New Year's Day to anyone who wanted to come in for a hot meal, and volunteers fanned out across the town to deliver food to those in need.
I believe that if there is one person who is in the street, hungry, in need, none of us is successful. So, I cannot change the whole world, but, I have to do whatever I can.
The 4th Street Staple was closed for regular business on the first day of 2020, but staff was busy cooking around 100 meals for those in need. The restaurant plans to offer food to the community once a month starting this year. Coming up next on Indiana Newsdesk. A pest normally found in the South has found its way to Indiana. Ahead, we'll look at why the Gulf Coast tick is being spotted this far north. And a new Trump administration rule meant to help vets get back to work could jeopardize jobs for the visually impaired. These stories and more right here on Indiana Newsdesk.
The WTIU WFIU news team connects Indiana to the world. We bring you the top news of the day on radio, TV, and online. We round up the stories that have people talking each week and dig deep into the issues that affect your community the most. The WTIU WFIU news team is where you are and telling your story.
In a time of change, where can you find in-depth reporting and thoughtful analysis? Washington Week on PBS. Join moderator Robert Costa.
When I was at the Capitol this week, I encountered the same.
And a panel of award-winning journalists.
You're seeing a divided nation, and you're seeing
for insights and perspective.
Tonight there was a key development in the Senate.
You won't find anywhere else.
What a week.
Washington Week.
Welcome back to Indiana Newsdesk. Indiana University researchers have spotted a tick rarely seen in the state. The Gulf Coast tick is usually found along the Gulf and Atlantic coast. But as Rebecca Thiel reports, researchers say it's moving north, and according to them, climate change could be the cause.
IU Professor Emeritus Keith Clay leads Project Vector Shield, which monitors tick and mosquito movements in the state. He says warmer winters have likely allowed the tick to survive in states north of its usual range.
It may be the tip of an iceberg that these populations of Gulf Coast ticks may be more prevalent than we realize.
This matters because the Gulf Coast tick can make people and animals sick. It carries the disease tidewater spotted fever, which can cause symptoms like fever, headaches, muscle aches, and a rash. Clay says it's similar to Rocky Mountain spotted fever, which can be deadly. But fortunately, he says, it's not as severe.
But nevertheless, quite debilitating and something you don't want to be exposed to.
Clay says, though the Gulf Coast tick isn't something to worry about right now, the team plans to do a thorough search for more of the ticks in southwest Indiana next spring. For Indiana Newsdesk, I'm Rebecca Thiel.
A Trump administration policy intended to help military veteran business owners may be having unintended consequences on visually impaired Hoosiers. Adam Pinsker tells us why one organization is worried about losing some of its employees because of the law.
How you doing now?
Ray Montgomery's path to the Bosma Center began more than 20 years ago.
I lost my sight in 1997 at 17 years old due to a gunshot wound, which caused me to go totally blind.
Once he got back on his feet, finding a job that he could do with his disability was difficult.
Just because I had that degree and I went to college and did everything that I thought was necessary in order to find gainful employment, but just really dealing with those misperceptions of people who are blind.
But Bosma Enterprises is shattering those misperceptions by creating jobs and careers that work for the visually impaired.
We're coming up to our exam glove packaging room.
That includes warehousing and packaging products like exam gloves, medical kits, and salt.
Our whole role here is to provide employment for people who are blind or visually impaired. With a 70% unemployment rate, it's very difficult for people who are blind or visually impaired to find work.
But Bosma CEO Jeffrey Mittman is worried about a Veterans Administration policy known as the Rule of Two. It requires the government to award contracts to veteran-owned businesses before considering companies that are primarily owned by visually impaired people.
That would include contracts that we've held for 20, 30 years. Some of our agencies across the country have held for decades.
Mittman, an Army veteran who lost his sight when an improvised explosive device landed in his Humvee, says Bosma goes through the same process all other companies do when bidding on government contracts. In addition to providing jobs, Bosma also helps people with vision loss navigate their lives and jobs.
Without us, there's 800 Hoosiers in the state of Indiana who would not have, every year, who would not receive rehabilitation services for their vision loss.
He worries the VA policy may reduce or eliminate the 200 positions inside Bosma's sprawling North Indianapolis facility, including packaging, food service, and retail jobs.
It's important, as I said, that the visually impaired, like those who are trained at Bosma, continue to have opportunities to participate in our workforce.
Senator Todd Young and other members of Indiana's legislative delegation are working with the Trump administration to resolve the conflicts with the new policy.
Wouldn't anticipate any challenges that Bosma would experience in landing additional contracts.
But Bosma isn't taking any chances. The company says it's looking for contracts with private, non-government companies to diversify its portfolio.
The padding on the inside is actually what protected my brain.
Mittman still has the Army helmet he was wearing the day he was attacked. The helmet's lining is made by a North Carolina company that employs blind people, some of whom were laid off because of this policy. Without that helmet, Mittman could have died. He's hoping the issue will convince people not to underestimate the talents of visually impaired people.
The person who does our social media is completely blind, using adaptive software, adaptive equipment on the computer. So the idea that somebody who has lost their vision can't perform a task or can't perform the standard is just not true.
Adam Pinsker joins us now for a little bit more. Thanks for that report. Yeah. Have there been any more resolutions to those disputes?
Actually, this morning I heard from Senator Young's office, a spokesperson says that the senator is still looking for a solution. They think that the House may actually have some bipartisan legislation that will look to some sort of resolution for this issue, but nothing specific yet. I think it's one of the few issues on Capitol Hill that both parties agree have to be fixed. So,
what other services could be affected at Bosma regarding if they lose these government contracts?
It's more than just the contracts, actually. Bosma helps train folks at the county level, people who are visually impaired, for jobs that they can do with their disability. So if you lose the revenue from those contracts, then it's really going to affect how much time and effort they can spend training people to do these kinds of jobs. So it's pretty widespread. Almost all of Indiana's counties have someone from Bosma or someone from one of these organizations training people to do these jobs.
We just have a few seconds left here, but what can be done now? What's next?
I think we also heard from Congresswoman Walorski up in South Bend. She's also written to the VA, so on the House side, to see if there's any kind of resolution as well. So they are working with the administration to try to get a resolution. It's just going to take some time.
Adam, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Well, dozens of intrepid polar plungers stormed into Lake Monroe. This despite temperatures hanging in the mid-30s. It's a Monroe County tradition to take the plunge on January 1st and start the year off with a splash. Around 10 a.m., the plungers rushed into the waters of Lake Monroe. Janice Chastain helps organize the plunge. She says the recent warm weather helped to bring out more plungers than last year. And that's the end of this program, but our work continues online as we cover the news throughout the week at WTIUnews.org. Have a great weekend.
Indiana Newsdesk is made possible in part by Smithville Fiber Internet, streaming TV, home security and automation in Southern Indiana. More information at smithville.com. Mallard Grodner Attorneys providing legal services to clients and the community. Understanding, expertise, results. Bloomington and Indianapolis. LawMG.com. IU Alumni Association connecting IU's network of alumni and sharing the Indiana spirit through scholarships, advocacy, and volunteerism. Alumni.iu.edu. IU Center for Rural Engagement extending IU Bloomington resources to improve Hoosier lives in partnership with communities and organizations. Rural.indiana.edu. And by WTIU members. Thank you.